Every now and then when speaking on the subject of big dreams and goals, someone might say, you're always talking about great big houses and fancy cars and boats and all that materialistic stuff. Well, first of all, stuff is not materialistic, people are. But materialism in its truest form, it's not about having nice things. There's nothing wrong with having nice things if you've earned them. Materialism is about those that always seem to have to put a dollar value on everything, usually for the purpose of talking you out of having one. I'm sure we've all heard phrases like, why would you spend so much money on that? And most often, those that start those conversations are usually people of very low self-esteem. They see no value in themselves. They certainly don't see themselves worthy of having great things, and therefore conclude you shouldn't have them either. That's what's really going on there. Does that make sense? I knew a gentleman. He built the largest house in Idaho. It's beautiful. I've been there several times. It's in a little town called Post Falls. The owner of the house never lived in that house. That was the second house. He lived in a much smaller place just down the road. I was at the house there one time with his son, Jim. And I said to Jim, your folks never stay at the house hardly. Why did he build it? And he says, I'll tell you why he built it. When you walk through this house, you've been through the secret doorway, you've been through the movie theaters, you've been through all the bedrooms, all the living rooms, all the various kitchens. You've been in the gym, you've been in the sauna, you've been in every room in the house. When you walk through this house, what thoughts go through your mind? And I said, well, that's easy to answer. Every time I'm here, I think the same thing. What's my excuse? And he says, that's why Dad built this house, so you could have that realization. What's your excuse? He built this house so people could understand that if they just got rid of their excuses and their fears, maybe what they could achieve. You don't have to want this house, but you got to want something. I was at a social function a number of years ago in Christchurch, and I met a lot of people that night. One was a school teacher. She introduced herself, and she started talking about school. And you know, if you ever speak with a school teacher, they're always talking about how much paperwork there is and how busy they are, and that was the conversation we were having this particular night. She got onto one particular student, a 13-year-old boy by the name of Billy. That's not really his name, but for the sake of giving him some privacy, that's what we call him. Billy had alcoholic and drug addict parents. He was not a planned birth. They didn't want him. He was hated at home. He had no friends at school. He really was, and I even hate the phrase, but he was the school loser. Everybody mocked him, everybody jeered at him, everybody gave him a hard time. So most of the time he just sat by himself, playing a little game that he played on a device. The teacher said to me that night, she said, you know, there's just no hope for people like that. And that's the bit that got me. I wasn't going to let that ride. There's always hope for everybody. She said he's never going to get a decent job, he's never going to get A's in school, he's never going to get any of those things. He's going to go through life a loser. And my immediate thought was, gosh, even she's given up on him. That's really sad. I said, what do you want for him? You want him to get an A on his school report? She said, yeah, but he never will. I said, do you want him to get an A on his school report? And she said, yeah, but how's that going to happen? I said, give me 5 minutes with him. And she said, you can't help him get an A. I said, oh, come on, you've only known me 5 minutes. You've got no idea what I can do. She said, how are you going to do that? And I said, just give me 5 minutes with him. What are you going to talk about? Don't know yet. I'll work it out when I get there. Skeptical and absolutely not believing I could achieve anything in that regard. She said, okay. A couple of days later, I went into the school, met the teacher at the office. She walked us through to the playground. It was at lunchtime. Everybody was out throwing a ball around, having some fun. Then there's this one kid sitting all by himself, hunched over, playing on a game device of some form. We walked over to him. He'd never looked up. The teacher said to him, hey, Billy, this is Mr. Malcolm. Never been called that before, Mr. Malcolm. He wants to talk with you for a minute. Put your game down and have a chat with Mr. Malcolm for a minute. And he goes, okay. And I go to sit down beside him, and as I sit down beside him, he quits the game. And on the desktop picture on his device, the background picture behind the icons, was a picture of a Porsche. It was a Carrera 4S. It was gunmetal grey. It was a cabriolet. The roof was down, and it had red leather interior. I said, nice car. You like those? He goes, yeah, who wouldn't? I said, yeah, they are nice. I said, have you ever seen one? You ever been in one? He goes, I wish. I said, would you like to go for a ride in one? He goes, who wouldn't? I said, no, Billy, would you like to go for a ride in one? And he looked at me, and he looked at the teacher, and he looked at me, and he looked at the teacher. What on earth is this about? And he goes, yeah. I said, Billy, would you like to go for a ride in one? And he goes, yeah, I really want to go for a ride in one. I said, how's things at home, Billy? And he said, not good. I said, how's things at school? How's your marks? How's your subjects? And he said, not so good, not so good. I said, I'm going to do you a deal. I said to the teacher, when's your next school reports come out? She said, 3 months. I said, if you get an A on your next school report, I'll make sure you go for a ride in a Porsche. He looked at me, he looked up at the teacher, he looked at me, he looked up at the teacher. He didn't believe that for a second. I said, shake on it. I stared him in the eye and said, shake on it. He looked at me, he looked at the teacher. He was not going to believe this. He shook on it. And I said, I'm going to keep in touch with your teacher. When the reports come out in 3 months, if you've got an A on that school report, I'll make sure you go for a ride in a Porsche. We talked about a few other things, just random stuff, and I left. I wasn't around the school for the next 3 months, so the story as it was told to me by the teacher is Billy was instantly a changed kid. He didn't know whether he should believe me or not. He didn't believe I was going to follow through on that promise one bit. But just in case I was, he worked his butt off. He read books he'd never read before. He had to overcome a whole pile of limiting thoughts. Nobody liked him. He was the loser of the school, of the family. Nobody cared. And he had to overcome thoughts of valuelessness, low self-esteem. No one wanted him. See, what the Porsche was about for Billy was about dignity. He wanted to know that he was worth something. And so he went to work and he read books and he studied like no one's ever studied in the history of that school. He went to bed at night with a pain inside of his gut because he wanted it so bad. He was crying at night because he wanted a ride in that Porsche. He went to school every day. He did math like he'd never done math before. He had read books. He did so many things. He overcame limiting beliefs because he wanted to believe he was someone that was worthy of a ride in a Porsche. When things got tough, the teacher said, come on, Billy, you can do this. You want to ride in that Porsche, don't you? See, even her attitude changed. All of a sudden, she believed in him, and that was a critical part. 3 months later, my phone rings. Malcolm, you better have a Porsche in your pocket. I said, oh, he did it. He got an A. She said, I don't believe this. He got 2. I said, that is absolutely fantastic. That absolutely makes my day to hear it. She said, don't fail him on this. I said, I have no intention of failing him on this. I'll be in touch with you in the next 48 hours. Well, now I had to find a Porsche. At that particular time in my life, I didn't own one. And the most obvious place, of course, to find a Porsche is at the Porsche dealership. I went down there and spoke with the manager, sat down with him, and I told him a story about a kid that the world hated, that the world mocked, jeered at, gave a hard time. Fat little kid, his parents had drug addiction problems, alcoholic problems. Nobody cared about little Billy. And I told him about a promise I made him, that if he got an A on his school report, I'd give him a ride on a Porsche. The manager of the dealership was sitting forward in his seat. He said, did he get an A? Did he get an A? I said, he got 2. He jumped up from his desk and he says, come with me. And he walks me through the showroom. He says, these are all brand new cars. I can't give you any of these. There's another group of cars. He says, these are consignment. They're selling on behalf. I can't give you these. They belong to somebody else. And he took me downstairs to a garage. And he said, but any of these cars here, they're yours for as long as you need them. And I went up and down a couple of rows of cars, and there it was, a gunmetal grey Carrera 4S Cabriolet with red leather interior. I said to the manager, "Dad, boy, right there, that's pretty close to exactly what he's got on his picture on his game device." The manager said, "That's great. You and I are going to go upstairs for a coffee. This car is not showroom ready. We're going to get one of the guys to polish it up a little bit for you. Let's go and have a coffee." 45 minutes later, after a coffee, I was sitting in the Porsche. It had just been cleaned. I was ready to drive off the showroom floor. The manager comes down and whacks his hand down on my shoulder pretty hard, actually. And he said, "I love what you're doing here, son." He says, "You make sure you give that kid the ride of his life. few minutes later, I'm driving towards the school, coming up on the lunch hour again, and I called the teacher and I says, lunch hour's coming up? She said, yep. I said, I'm on my way right now. She said, are you in the car? I said, I'm in the car. I said, make sure the entire school is watching. I want Billy to feel like $1 million over this. I drove into the school. She opened the gate so I could drive through to where all the kids were eating their school lunch. Parked the car there. I could see way over in the distance Billy was sitting in the same spot I met him, playing that same game. A bunch of other kids saw the Porsche. Wow, look at that, it's a Porsche. How cool is that? Teacher went over and got Billy. Got his attention. He looked over and he saw the car. He just went into almost shock. He couldn't believe it. He froze. Teacher grabbed his hand and walked him over to the car. She said, come on, Billy, you've earned this. She walked him over to the car, and he couldn't believe it. And none of the other school kids believed that this car was there for Billy. Of all the people in the entire school, it was there for Billy. I got out of the car, opened the passenger door, and I said, Billy, get in, buddy, we're going for a ride. And he looked up at me and he looked up at the teacher. He was in absolute shock. And again, all the other kids are going, Billy's getting in that car. Trust me, he went from being the school loser to one of the cool kids instantly. The teacher said, I've okayed it with your parents. Get in the car, you've earned this. Go for a ride. 10 minutes later, we're on a back country road south of Christchurch. The roof is down, the stereo is blasting. I say to Billy, what do you think of the car, bud? And he goes, this is awesome. This is awesome. He said, why did you do this for me? And I said, this is not about what I'm doing for you. You earned this. You've worked like I've never seen anybody work before. You've earned this. And I had no choice but to make sure you got a ride in this car. He goes, this is the coolest thing I've ever done in my life. He said, we're going a bit slow though, can we speed it up? And I said, well, we are actually doing, and I told him what speed we were doing. Let's just say it was more than the speed limit. And he goes, oh, wow. That story was a number of years ago now. Billy is a changed kid. He's got dignity. He's got a really good job. He's in the process of starting his own business. He's doing some really, really cool things because he started to believe in himself. What was Billy's success that day? Was it that he went for a ride in a Porsche? No, that was just the reward. Billy's success is he spent 3 months fighting with himself internally, overcoming all the hate from his family, all of the jeering from the school kids. Everybody had told him he's a loser his entire life. Nobody wanted him. Nobody wanted to know him. All those feelings of inferiority, he had to overcome those mentally. And he did. Remember, this whole thing was about dignity for him. He wanted to believe he was worth something. When we talk about large dreams and goals, think of the story of Billy. You have within yourself talents, skills, abilities, and forces available to you that were given to you freely at birth, that up until now, we've never had a use for. We've never had a reason to develop them. The reason we get large dreams and goals, even if it is things like houses, cars, boats, doesn't matter what it is, whatever it takes to pull those forces out of us. Success is about overcoming. It's about personal growth. And the goal gives us a reason to do that. I've never met a successful person yet who scores their success on their houses and their cars and their boats. Their success is their testimony, how they went from nothing to having all of that. It's about their personal growth. My hope and prayer for you is you get a dream so colossal, so big, that you're going to reach inside yourself and start discovering things about you you never ever knew. You're going to start reading books, and you're going to start finding skills and talents and forces and powers within inside of yourself that have never needed to be awakened yet because we've never had a goal to pull us there. I hope you get a massive dream, a colossal goal, and I don't care if it is one of those things that other people call materialistic, whatever it's going to take to get you to build yourself, to grow, to overcome in those areas. Your dream is sacred. That's why we say things like, get a colossal dream and never apologize to anybody for it. When somebody says to you something like, why would you want something like that? Well, that's what a dream stealer looks like. And your response to them needs to be, because it's my dream, and my dream is sacred. Step off. What's your problem? Don't you have one?